the webinar with the title Challenges in Maintaining Critical Risk Controls. And you already have heard Charles, Shishiri, and myself. We will actively contribute. The focus is on maintaining critical risk controls. And this is the basic approach what we prepared, but what we like is we are small enough to also have some interactivity in this group. So please feel free to post some questions. But this is what we like to do. We briefly introduce ourselves. Charles will enlighten us with some actual icebreakers, but also like introductions into the concept. And I will speak a bit on the latest development of ours. It's called Riskrunner. And we've got hopefully some time for Q&As, but I think it's better also that we just do it. Just raise your hand, and then we try to give it a meaningful response. So, first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Charles. As you can read, he has quite a lot of experience in risk and emergency or crisis response. As you can, you can read, but I think how I've gotten to know him is he is eloquent. He has a ability to put the right words to topics, and he has a very wide interest, which is, I think, a very valuable competency if you are functioning in these roles. And myself, I am part of the Resilium team. I do consulting, but also like to work on business development. And the reason also why we work together in this is that we as Resilium, we like to work with local or expertise that is relevant so that our clients are assisted as good as they can in answering the question, okay, are we able to have the best response to when we are faced with risk? And risk is the influence of uncertainty on our objectives. That's what we're after. So we just try to help our clients to make better decisions in risk. So a very, very short, like who we are. I'm currently presenting from the Netherlands. So we've got a small team from the Netherlands here, and also a team in the UK. As you can see, we work with other partners. And our main focus is infrastructure, energy, and transport. It's not really limited to it. Apart from working with workshops or training or software, we also like to play games. Why do that is because everybody, if you learn, you do that the best by also playing a game. And you see an example of people just engaging on a very, very serious topic in a playful environment. So that, I think, illustrates us. It's my pleasure to introduce Charles. And I just like to give you the floor, Charles.
All right. Thanks very much, Dan, and morning, colleagues. Basically, this morning we will be talking about critical risk management, and perhaps with focus on Riskrunner. But I'll be taking you through some of the fundamentals in terms of critical risk management, and some typical examples of disasters that have happened in Africa. And perhaps we could discuss, some of the issues that would relate to, the critical controls that relate to those disasters. Just as a way to start off the conversation, they say that when things are going well, we hardly attribute it to good risk management. However, when things are going badly, we attribute it to poor risk management. I think we've all experienced this as, as SHE managers, as environmental managers, as risk managers, that, within the organization, people tend to forget about us when things are going okay. But whenever you have a major emergency or a major disaster, that's when you find that, people start remembering, oh, there's a SHE manager in this organization. There's an emergency manager in this organization. And also that, risk management pervades every decision that we make. In other words, every single thing that we do in life, from the time that, you wake up, has to do with risk management. There's risks and there's opportunities to glean from whatever we want to do at that particular time. And the temptation that is there for us as risk managers is to work in the organization, as I call it, as opposed to working on the organization or working on the business. What I simply mean by that is that, there is a temptation to believe that, when you have a lot of systems, you've got a lot of standards, you've got a lot of procedures, then you are in control. And yet, sometimes it's really about ensuring that you've got, the critical controls in place, and then also that, those controls are actually working. So you'll find that, as risk managers, in fact, as part of, the conversation that we'll be having today, is around adopting, the right sort of models for managing risk. And I just also wanted to coin, a quotation or citation from George P. Box, who said that all models are false, but some are useful. Where we are really saying that, the model that you adopt in terms of managing your risk must befit for the purpose that you want to, for what you want to manage. And as you can see from that chart there, or that risk management continuum, what we're saying is, your take two kind of, procedure or system would be more suitable for your low risk type work on the work front type of risk assessment. And as you go towards your more catastrophic type risks, you need more complex or more formalized risk assessment tools. I'll also just take you through a number of real-life disasters that have happened in Africa. I'm taking a view where I'm giving examples from all sorts of industries. From like your football matches, like the first one where we're talking about the Ellis Park Stadium disaster that happened in South Africa in 2001. This disaster actually resulted in 43 lives being lost. It was more of like a stadium stampede, type incident. And some of the key issues that were highlighted there had to do with the, security personnel that were actually taking bribes and admitting fans, who had no tickets into the stadium. Which was really, I guess the ticket was meant to be some kind of like a defense, such that, you know your numbers in terms of the capacity of the stadium. And also, further to this, there was also the fact that, the security guards then vented some tear gas on the stampeding fans, which then also then worsened the situation and resulted, in these 43 lives being lost. So that's the first example. I also go on to the second one, which is closer to home for me, being a Zimbabwean, which actually happened in 1972 in the then Rhodesia, and what used to be called Wanke Colliery. Now we call it Wange Colliery Mine, where there were some methane gas explosions that really ripped through the mine, resulting in 427 lives being lost. I think this is one of our worst ever, disasters as a country. And I think I'll also talk a bit more on these coal mine explosions, where I'll highlight another incident that also happened in Africa, which had to do with this methane gas explosions. Just to go on to the environmental side, we've got one, tailings dam disaster that happened in Zambia, where a total of 50 million liters of highly toxic mining waste was actually discharged into the Kafue River. And the Kafue River actually serves over 60% of the population, and over 5 million inhabitants actually drink this water. And this disaster resulted in widespread ecological damage and mass mortality of bird life, fish, and all that. Basically it was a tailings dam collapse. I think for the guys who are into mining, they would know that a tailings dam collapse is something that you don't want to have. In fact, it is something that can really result in even your share prices plummeting, and even your chief operations officers and your CEOs can really be on their toes because of this.
Yeah. And it's also it's quite recent. I've not seen something in our news, but was it a big topic in Africa?
Yes, it was a big topic. It's actually happened this year.
Yeah. Awful.
Right. Yeah, and then I'll also perhaps just touch a bit on the Riskrunner tailings dam disaster. This was also another, mining sludge type incident, which really resulted in 17 people dead, and this was really because of flood incident where they had like a 50 millimeter thunderstorm that actually occurred during the day. And unfortunately, the dam was in an unacceptable condition. And really, the dam also didn't have the capacity to hold the 0.5 meter freeboard. That dams are supposed to be designed at, and also the 1 in 100 year storm, or 1 in 100 year flood. As you'd know, most of these structures, your bridges, your dams, and everything else are built normally on a 1 to 100 or 1 to 150, 1 to 200 year flood to be able to contain that kind of worst case scenario. But in this case, this was really not the case.
Yeah. So it was not a new incident.
No, it actually wasn't. And then I'll touch a bit also on the Patel moment. This is more like a farm dam type incident, and the company is actually a rose farm that was supplying roses. I think to Netherlands, to you guys, Dan. It was a privately owned dam. For actually they had 5 of these on-farm dams, and I think this is actually one of the biggest challenges that we have in Africa, in Zimbabwe here and in Africa in general, where some of these farm dams are supposed to meet some stringent engineering designs, but that might not actually be the case. So what actually happened there is that the dam actually breached, and 70 million liters of water were unleashed, and the water, as it was flowing, it was almost like 1.5 meters, the water board, and over like half a kilometer in terms of width, and this resulted in over 2,000 people being rendered homeless, and 48 people actually died during the incident. It had actually been raining for 2 days. I think one of the key issues that came out of there was the issue of spillways, where a lot of these farm dams actually designed without spillways, and these spillways are actually part of the critical controls in that they enable water to be released gradually, such that the dam does not overtop.
Yeah. Awful.
Yeah, so just the sort of the last one, which reiterates what I was talking about earlier on about the Hwange colliery disaster, is the Hlobani coal mine explosion, which happened in a place called Vryheid in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, in 1944 on the 12th of September. We actually then had a repeat incident 39 years after, in 1983 on September the 12th as well. So, perhaps there's something about that date, that September 12th. It was actually a deadly explosion, resulted in 57 workers dying in 1944. And then in 39 years later, actually death toll increased to 68. And the result was because of burn injuries, as well as intoxication from the gas. And some of the key issues that were pointed out, included insufficient ventilation, the accumulation of methane gas, overnight. These guys were drilling through some kind of like a dike. And then also the miner's lamp that they were using, which then, as they tried to ignite it, it actually then ignited, the combustive methane gas environment.
Yeah.
So perhaps as a question that I would pose to the houses, what do these disasters tell us about critical risk management? It's a question that I would pose to the house. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to shoot there, come up with a contribution in terms of saying these low probability, high severity type incidents or disasters that hit us, at an instant. What is it that these disasters tell us about critical risk management? Anybody?
Well, I think it indicates that you have opportunities to learn.
Charles,
Go ahead.
I think from my side, I think what I'm seeing is issue of risk control maybe starts from the designing of these projects. Should have taken it's going to likely happen, especially identifying what are your critical points, which will, if not well looked after, may result in a disaster. Like with those we have highlighted, like those small dams we mentioned, where the backyard dams, which we just designed for the sake of producing the product and selling, or those mines which we just started. I think by then they were not having adequate resources or skills to track and trace where methane is leaking, which may result in these disasters happening. So I think what I'm picking from all the cases you have presented is the importance of planning with the risk in mind prior to the project commencement. I think that's what I picked across.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ranga. I think it's a pertinent point that you raised there. The issue of ensuring that is at the design stage, you're already thinking about your critical controls right from the design stage, such that you design you design it right, such that you don't have to then retrofit your controls. Thanks for that. Thanks very much for that. I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can just then go on to.
Oh, we've got another hand raised.
Okay, Varaizo, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful presentation. And I want to respond to the question that you have just posed, that risk management also needs, we need continuous risk management. Yes, we can plan, but if we dwell on the plan and design alone, sometimes we are caught unawares when disaster strikes. So the management must be continuous, with people being taught on the risks that they can face. Yeah, thank you. That's what I wanted to contribute.
Thanks very much, Varaizo. I think you're talking to the issue of ensuring that we maintain those controls. We might have designed it correctly, but we need to make sure that there's adequate maintenance, not only from a physical maintenance, but also ensuring that the people that interact with the hazards and risks are also fit, to be able to manage and mitigate those risks. Thank you. Yeah, I think we can go on to just the inquest. I'll also just highlight on some of the key issues that came out of the inquest following that disaster. There were three main issues that were pointed out, which related to the conditions that had to be met for that explosion to occur. The first one was the concentration of methane gas. And also the second one being that methane gas had to be ignited, and also that it would have been undetected. And what's also said is that regulations are under the Mines and Works Act are really meant to reduce the chances of these explosions happening within the mines. And the evidence was that many of those regulations had been ignored. In fact, under this particular mine, it said that 21 Mines and Works Act regulations had actually been broken a number of times before at this mine. And like I always say, when something is regulated, it basically means that you need to have a critical control around it. It means that the system has identified that that particular process is critical, and obviously you need to put in a critical control around it. And then perhaps just to talk about some of the best practice standards that came out of the inquest. A number of experts were called in, and there were three main issues that were pointed out. The first one had to do with the ventilation regulations in the mines there, which were seen to be not very adequate, and also the flame safety lamps that were being used. The US and Europe, had moved away from these flame safety lamps, and were using methanometers, which were much safer and could also detect methane at much lower concentrations. So these are all critical controls. And also from a rescue perspective, it's also believed that when the work has been provided with self-rescue equipment, either for converting carbon monoxide into carbon dioxide or providing fresh oxygen, that lives could have been saved as well. So all these actually talk to critical controls, either pre-event or post-event. And then I'll just touch on some of the misconceptions that we have around critical control management. The first one, I think some of these I've already alluded to, is the issue of having a whole long list of generic controls within our risk assessments There's a certain comfort that comes with, having a very detailed risk assessment, but sometimes, you need to also tease out those controls. How critical are those controls? Issues around maintenance and inspections. These are critical in terms of ensuring that the system is sound, but it doesn't necessarily mean that when you have these systems, you are actually managing your critical controls. Some also think that critical controls are a list of lagging indicators, and this is also not the case. And in terms of our paper mountain, the issue of your safety policies, your safety procedures, your visible felt leadership programs, your behavior-based safety programs, your audits, your inspections. These will complement, your critical control management program, but they're not necessarily your critical controls. I also then pose this question to us to say, what are some of the misconceptions that we see, within our fields of expertise or within our industries around critical control management? What are some of the misconceptions that we seem to be picking up? If we have any contributions in the house. Some of the experiences, are there any experiences that we have had in terms of our critical control management programs, and some of the misconceptions that we might have in industry in terms of this?
It's Laura, she types, if it's compliant, then it's good. Then over-reliance that people will follow procedures, but on critical points. That's one. Will follow procedures, but on critical points that don't have redundancy. Okay, thanks.
Yes. Yeah. I see Ranga's hand is up again. Ranga, you can shoot.
Yes. Go ahead.
You're on silent if you are talking. No. Ranga, we cannot hear you. I think you are on mute.
Okay, hello, sorry. My computer was freezing, failing to unmute. But anyway, I think one of the major one is people, they think, business leaders, they think that if they provide PPE, it's enough to provide the protection for the workers. It's a misconception that if you provide PPE, there will be no injuries at all. And also maybe the other one, they think where there's a critical, where there's a control in place, they think it's effective. Like for example, to say let's have seat belts provided, then they'll think no accidents are going to happen. I think that's a misconception as well. We need to target. It's a whole lot of things that are brought in place to try and manage the risk at the end.
Thanks, Ranga. I think that's an interesting one. The one for PPE, that in fact PPE is the last. It's kind of like the last form of defense that you have. But it's also, I think, like you rightly point out there, that most people would think.
Most investors, after issuing PPE, they think everything PPE, and then they provide a safety officer, safety man, then they said, go ahead and work.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a pertinent point that you've raised there, and also the issue of just the presence of the control, that you've got a safety belt does not mean that the person is going to actually use the belt. And I think perhaps Dan at some stage, depending on time, might be able to then look at those escalation risk factors to say you've got a control, but what then happens if somebody decides not to wear the belt and things like that. Thank
Yeah.
you. Perhaps we can go on to my final part. I'm trying to manage time as well. So I'll also give some insights into, critical control management, where I'll cite, Dr. Sean Brady, who said that, organizations often think that they are managing risk when in fact they are managing paperwork. I think this is the biggest risk for most risk managers, where we have this comfort, like from my emergency preparedness, background. I know that, having a huge, emergency response manual is not going to cut it, especially when there's an emergency, because people are not going to read it, and it's likely going to be in file 13, where it's going to be filed away somewhere, and nothing's going to happen about it. So what is critical control management? It's a systematic approach where you identify, your critical controls, you develop them, you implement them, and you also then verify. I think this is what I think Ranga was alluding to this earlier on. And I think Varite as well, that, you need to verify the controls, that the controls are actually working. And, these controls come either for prevention or they come as for mitigation, as, we saw in that stadium example. And it's for high consequence risks. So it's not every hazard or every risk that needs a critical control management program, a critical control management system. So the most focus should be on your most important safeguards. And I think that diagram that you see there is, the DDA, I think the security risk management as well as risk management in general. We always talk about detect, decide, and act, where we're saying, your control must be able to detect, the issue at hand. It must facilitate, decision making in terms of saying what needs to be done about this, this hazard or the risk. And also, it must facilitate action. In other words, it must, deploy at an instant. And, all these controls are meant to really facilitate, delivery in terms of your systems, your organizational, objectives or, operational objectives that you might have as an organization. I think this is where I'll probably leave it. I'll probably ask Dan to then take us through the Riskrunner and see how perhaps the Riskrunner can help us in managing these critical risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles, and also all in the house to contribute. So this depiction of what you see with the primary function, the primary function is what we can describe it like a control or a safeguard or a barrier. It all comes down to, okay, but what is the influencing factor in preventing or mitigating these risks? And that is part and parcel of what we do in Resilium, and also what we aim for of really enabling your organizations to, instead of focusing on PPEs, to also make it manageable, so that we can see that all the underlying delivery systems or procedures or it's all supporting that this critical control, and that's why it is so valuable. Because it brings it also down to something that people can comprehend, whether you are on the sharp edge or whether you are a decision maker and have to provide the budget. It all comes down to clarity. So that's also why we call it the tool that we have created. We call it Riskrunner. Riskrunner. We see that over time a lot of effort goes into analyzing risk, and sometimes we overanalyze it, or sometimes we underanalyze it, but it is like we have some sort of a feeling that when we analyze risk and then we have a report, then we also manage risk. But we can have a debate on that, whether that is the case. So the reason why we call it Riskrunner is that once we know then what is the construct of our scenarios or our risks, are we able to say, hey, but did we run that risk in time? Are we ready to go? Are we ready to proceed on the critical ones? And that's, of course, not something that you do for everything, but the top risks of your organization that you have identified, that you have analyzed, and now it's able to easily verify. And that's what we have with Riskrunner. It is a fully online tool, and it enables you to work with multiple assessments or just like one single assessment, and that you can vary between the level of analysis. So whether you just have a register with your scenarios and controls, or you do a deeper dive, and we have a bow tie methodology, and I will briefly introduce you to that as well. But what is part of it is that you have this systematic feedback collection that you can say, okay, but is this control, will it work when it is needed? Because that's where we are managing. So apart from that, we action tracking, and you've got this systematic planning of the checks. And a big part of it is also, we see a lot of organizations, they've got opportunities to learn, but it's hard to learn. And you might recognize that you've got maybe a notification of an improvement or an incident, and that gets the attention, but that it is repeated. So that is a tough challenge which we also take up with Riskrunner. So it's fully online, and it's also not focused only on risk specialists, but also like the owners and the critical control owners and the risk owners. So we work together in the end, being able to answer whether these controls will work. So it's not only, of course, it is an effort to do it, but it also has benefits because you are able to really have priority. And instead of like having these repeat conversations, for example, about PPEs, you are starting to have like conversations on the sharp end of business. And by doing it this way, it will save time. And you also are able to facilitate this cross-site or cross-industry even learning, cross-project learning, sorry, that's what I mean. And we try to make it as simple as possible without oversimplifying it, because that's of course a risk. So we work with, we call it PRM, it's progressive risk model. And whether we start at level 1, and this is an example of working at height, and that we just do an identification, like what is the critical event, the top event, whether we might have like a dropped object. We identified some threats, and we identified some consequences and barriers or safeguards or controls. It's the same, and it depends a little bit on the terminology you use in your company. And you might come to the conclusion, well, this is good enough. Level 1, this is what it is. We have identified it, and we can of course make it more complicated, but level 2 is where you are going to define an attribute. Well, but where does these controls have an effect? So do they have an effect on a threat, or do they have an effect more on the consequence? And you can also see that, for example, for strong winds, you actually do not really have a control here. And that's by simply dragging and dropping it. This is analyzing the risk. And the deepest level that you can work on is the so-called bow tie. The bow tie, maybe you can raise a hand if that is a new concept for you, so that I can know how deeply I should explain it. But what you can do here is you can now very visually see what is the top event, the critical event that we like to prevent, and here you can see quite nicely what are our preventive controls, and also on the right hand side you can see what are our corrective or mitigation controls, and that's where you are in emergency response or trying to mitigate the actual impact of the consequences and get back into the desired state as soon as we like. So this is part and parcel of Riskrunner. And the good part is that it's all within the same assessment, and you don't have to build bow ties for everything, or you don't have to just stick to like a little bit higher level assessment. You are just able to choose the methodology that makes sense for your risk or for your scenario. please feel free to interrupt if you have some questions about it. But I don't want to do like a full sales pitch on it, but it is illustrating how we do it. Because this is the end goal, that once, and whether we have identified it using level 1 or 2 or 3 analysis, we want to be able to, once we have identified the critical controls, that we are able to define, okay, well, what is the expected performance? Will it work? And you can see that over time, berry performance might start poor, and then it moves up, and it might even be working way better based on some options, some tests, some trials, and then you can say, okay, well, maybe we have invested a bit too much into this control. Let's just bring it back into the desired level. But the focus is then on managing control, and that's why it's also good business to do this. So this is the end goal, and by doing that, by having this variation and this quick insight into the performance of these controls, you can also start to see if you learn from feedback from your organization that some of these controls are not working, that you can act, and that there is something that we should add, like an additional resource or review to it, and whether it is a project or whether it is an asset, that you have the ability to act before something is going to happen, because now you're going to make visual that these critical controls need attention. If you compare it to your organization that you're working in, what do you have maybe some questions on where you see opportunities or maybe some challenges in get this implemented? And I will finish this webinar by showing briefly how we do it. But I think just in general, this concept, is this something that could work, and what could be like some hurdles to jump over? Charles.
Yeah, I think for me, the critical control management, this particular barrier performance, report, I think is actually very critical for your senior leadership, because it gives them line of sight in terms of the performance of the organization. It literally almost tells them, this is where you are likely to pick up an accident.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from that perspective, which is what senior leadership wants, they want that comfort, that the controls are working. So this barrier performance report, for me, it's a report that you would be presenting to your senior leadership in an executive committee meeting or something, that tells them, in terms of our critical barriers that we have identified, this is where we are sitting.
Yes. Yeah. Any other feedback? So the question might be, okay, but how do you do that then? Yeah, so I will quickly dive into just the Riskrunner tool, so that you can that we can get a grasp of how that works, and then we can finalize our discussion. There we go. So this is Riskrunner, and this is how it works. You can simply work with these. You can do a risk assessment, and I'm just coming back to the topic, to the example that Charles started with the Ellis Park Stadium, where we can look into, okay, well, these are the threats, and these are some consequences and the barriers. We can rename it into controls or whatever you like. And here you can see that we've identified crowd control, and this might also be a control like strict scanning and supervision of stadium personnel. That might have had an effect. But by simply just putting it down, I don't think that is going to happen. First of all, you can do a deeper dive of a control, and you can firstly say, well, it's great, but it's not implemented. We can work with effectiveness, but we can also work, for example, with who are the accountable people, that they also are providing actual feedback. Is someone accountable? That also happens. We can also do like deeper dives. Okay, but what is all needed underneath to make sure that this is not a nice statement, a strict scanning and supervision of stadium personnel, but what is that? What are the preconditions that are needed to be able to do that? So to illustrate the different levels of analysis, so this might be your first analysis, but we say, well, we want to see where does this work. So crowd control, for example, where does this barrier have an effect? So it might have an effect on people hurt. It might also having due to I think fatalities. So we can simply drag and drop. Strict scanning and supervision of stadium personnel. This is something that has an effect in maybe both. So we also use these controls, and then we are able to say, okay, well, but it's great, but we do not have like a control for the collapsing of the grandstand, and so we might need to do something about that. So this is just an indication of how you can do these various analysis, and we can also build like a full bow tie by simply dragging and dropping. And so if we say, well, this is the critical event, we can also build up the bow tie by simply dragging and dropping it. And so that's why we make the tool as intuitive as possible, and it is in very active development. But by doing it like this, you are going to see, okay, but now visually we see what are our preventive controls and what are our corrective controls, and we see that we've got some issues because not all scenarios are covered well. Without going too much into further detail, but now we have let's say we have considered this scenario well enough, and I want to finish it. How do I get then feedback on the performance of these controls? So the very straightforward way is just, of course, asking the responsible people in time. And that's something that we also made very simple. You might have other data or other data sources, but that's where we work with a review. And a review, we've planned a review and we can plan them over time. But we also make that simple. So, for example, this is the event preparation review because we've got like the soccer match of the year, and we want to just make sure that these critical controls are being reviewed. So, for example, crowd control, we also want to have like feedback. Okay, how good will it work? I say, well, we are super convinced that it will be working good. And strict scanning and supervision, this has the highest priority. It will be very good. And we have a comment. We've got new supervisors added to the team. That might be something that why we are convinced. And crowd control might also be really good. So we've got a flag on the performance of the control, and this is just to indicate the that we want to collect feedback on the performance of the controls, making it as dynamic as possible. And there are other ways, but this is the straightforward way of how we do that. So if we then also look at our soccer match, that we also start to see what is the perceived preparation that we have on these controls. And if it is of course red, then this is something that we need to act upon, and that we can report on in another fashion. As well. So this is just a very brief introduction to how we picked it up with Riskrunner. To come back to that, we have other solutions. For example, you might have systems already, or maybe not. Then you are able to just use the tool, build up your assessments, and get get verification in a very straightforward way. But it's also very open to work with other tools or maybe to other reporting flows that you have ongoing in your organization. Yeah, my end question to you is: did you learn something today in terms of the focus on critical controls, on the focus on working with a tool like this? How applicable would this be for your organization? The floor is open. Thank you, Laura. It's interesting. Yes, yeah. Thank you, Charles, also for filling us in with these examples and also seeing where it can be very challenging to see and that we've got these incidents just laying there, and we can prevent those, and we should. Yeah. The invitation is, of course, to yeah, thank you. If you want to learn more, we are most happy to go and consult. We can assist you with providing access or just talk about your use cases. Please feel free to reach out to Charles or us in the team, and then we can just define what might be a good solution for your organization. And in the end, I think it goes back to what Charles was stating in there. The focus should be on managing the most important safeguards. We cannot manage like everything. We cannot have like a full line of sight on everything, because it's simply too much. That's why critical control management is so very useful, and that we should have a critical control that is also designed really well, so that it gets the attention when it is needed. I'd like to thank you for now for your attention. Yeah, we can leave it open, but we are also at the end of the time that we scheduled for this webinar. Yeah, any questions? Please feel free to just let us know, and we're happy to stay in a little bit longer and continue our conversation until we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks all for your time. Enjoy your day, and yeah, we will follow up also with everyone with the slide materials, and yeah, feel free to reach out. Looking forward to working together. Have a great day.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.